Hey, so as you might have seen in the community post, the episode 51 video was first claimed and then struck down completely. Unfortunately, Attack on Titan is only the second series for me where strikes are flying around, so now things are getting very spooky. If you don't know, 3 strikes and the channel is deleted, that's it. I've already put in all the counters and everything I can, so now it's in the hands of YouTube and then we'll see what happens from there. Hopefully that is the only episode that this happens to, but for the time being, it will be unviewable. I can't re-upload it for what I think are obvious reasons. And on that note, I don't normally do this, but just in case, you might wanna, check out my other socials and subscribe to my second channel maybe. Just in case. Hopefully nothing happens, but you can never be too sure. For now though, that's kinda where we're at. This episode was already super deep into production, but now that I have this little setup here, you'll be seeing a whole lot more of me on camera as well to hopefully help with these random claims in the future. But anyway, with that said, I hope you enjoy the episode. Episode 52 skips the opening sequence and moves right into the title, Descent. I think the simplest interpretation here is the whole descendants of devils talk that we see throughout this entire episode. Despite all the craziness that has already happened, much of what we see in this episode I think would truly mark a point of no return. And so creating this dichotomy of 2 directly opposing sides, while both actually share the same exact ancestors, very neatly encompasses the brutality and frankly senselessness of this entire conflict. Inheritance is obviously a huge part of the Attack on Titan story, so I won't rehash all that again, but we'll continue to touch on this point plenty of times throughout the episode. Though an alternate interpretation I would offer up is just Bertolt, because, he'd be airdropped in, so he descends. Very profound, I know. Moving into the episode itself, before we pick back up with the Shiganshina conflict, we briefly descend into some more memories. Get it? Descend as in the title? Descend? Okay, that doesn't even make sense. I think the episode opening with the very familiar Trost music just puts you in this bizarre headspace of, wait, why are we back here? Did I put on, the wrong episode? Everything here appears to be exactly the same as Season 1, even down to the music, so just like so many times before, this is a almost meta way of making the viewer pay attention, not because of what is happening in the show per se, but rather in the way that it is being presented. And if you really want to overanalyze, and this time that is to the power of 10, this also directly mirrors episode 34 and Reiner's mind cracking there. Both episodes open with this really interesting direction angle that sort of transcends the story itself, and more so makes the viewer ask whether they have missed something along the way. In episode 34, that is of course Reiner casually talking about his day as if, he hadn't just kidnapped Eren. In this case though, it is just sending us back to Trost. And in both of these cases, it's only after that we finally get to see the Marco stuff. But before we get to the Marco stuff, I want to briefly return to that point of music and everything else being exactly the same. This time, our perspective characters are not the scouts, it's Reiner, right? So the scene retaining that exact framing, I think neatly illustrates that split in his mind. On one hand, they talk about stopping him, but on the other, the music keeps going because, in parts, this triumph is also Reiner's. It just continues that trend of us now seeing more and more of the quote-unquote enemy perspective and learning that this conflict is far from just a simple bad guy versus good guy. Also, Pad's level overanalyzing, but when you contrast this to the actual Trost mission, I think in the context of this episode, it is also reframing Eren's Titan from being Atlas carrying the entire world, to being Sisyphus pushing up the boulder and it eventually just falling down. Back then, Eren was indeed humanity's hope, he was Atlas maintaining order. By the end of this arc though, well, he seems a whole lot more like Sisyphus just pushing up the rock and it eventually falling down, a never-ending cycle. Also, I have to mention the usual question of why didn't they do anything here and why did they just sit around for like 5 years? We've covered this extensively before, so I won't rehash all that again. Check out the Season 1 Episode 4 and 5 videos in case you've missed it. It's when Marco pops up that nearly all sound cuts out. Even the fires and titans in the background go super quiet. That shared triumph immediately dissipates as Reiner is abruptly pulled back right into his warrior persona. And the thing that I absolutely love here is how he just blurts out that entire conversation you just heard, yeah, that was a joke. It is so dumb, but it is so real. This is literally that meme of you in middle school telling your crush you like them, only to immediately say, no, I was just joking. It's this totally surface level, barely coherent thought that he just throws out hoping that Marco would be like, yeah, sure, Reiner. The sheer concept of him overhearing people talking about literally being the armor titan and then throwing out this nonsensical line is just so dumb that, like, he shouldn't believe it. And that's the thing, because when looked at in isolation, it is a really, really weak, almost cringeworthy line that doesn't really seem like strong writing. But in the story as a whole, I think this is the perfect example of actually realistic dialogue. Yes, when people are shocked, no matter how big-brained they are, they do often become just awkward, and this is exactly that. I think this is actually one of those super interesting paradoxes when it comes to writing. Sometimes the quote-unquote worst lines from a purely writing perspective are actually the most realistic. And even from an in-universe sense, I don't think the scouts joking about Titans would be all that rare. Keep in mind that at this point, the Annie mission hasn't happened yet, and so the Armored and the Colossal are just two enigmas. Sure, Eren is a Titan, and you can draw some theories from that, but we don't really have any suspects. A lot of people tend to get caught up on the whole, oh, we have a long-haired blonde that uses martial arts and that just so happens to be Annie, or wow, the Armored Titan looks exactly like Reiner, who could ever tell? But I think that is one of those things that is sort of impossible to convey in a show like this. The audience will inevitably figure out the similarities because the show is designed to do that. What we are seeing is a tiny, tiny vertical slice of what these characters' lives actually look like. But realistically, each and every one of them see hundreds of blonde dudes every single day. Drawing a parallel between a Titan you've seen for all of like 3 minutes in your entire life once and Reiner is kind of impossible, you know? And like I said, in these high-intensity situations, and we've actually seen this before with Reiner's secret technique of taking down Titans, I think joking about these kinds of things would be totally normal. There's a bunch of research about depressed populations and the prevalence of humor, and more specifically, dark and sometimes morbid humor, so yeah, playing it off as a joke is both goofy as well as totally viable. Marco himself says that it's not the time for jokes and that they need to focus on the mission. So I think his initial reaction is definitely just, oh, Reiner is cracking jokes again. But saying that, as he zips off, something primal goes off in his brain. And somewhat amusingly, I think this is actually another Reiner blunder. Not Marco literally hearing him say that he is the Armored Titan, but his reaction after that. Because when he zips off, he immediately notices that something about Reiner's reaction is just not right. And so, that signature eerie music kicks in as he starts piecing together the whole Titan mystery. But what I think is the most important thing to note here is that, by my read at least, even now, Marco hasn't accepted the fact that Reiner is like actually a shifter. Despite what he heard, there is literally zero proof whatsoever. And just like we see with everyone else, I suspect there would also be some pretty thick layers of denial. So I think this is just him waking up to their new reality slightly faster than everyone else. But at the same time, we don't really know too much about Marco. A lot of the things in the show do point toward him actually being another Omega Brain, including what Reiner would say in just a moment. If you recall what we talked about with the ED and all the little bits of characterization there, Marco would be the one shouting all the answers in class, so while I think there should be denial, perhaps he'd very quickly get through that cognitive dissonance and actually accept these two as Titans. Problem is, while him blowing the whistle about Reiner and Burrito might make for a fun little thought experiment, it doesn't really matter because almost right away they bring him down. And man, the way this entire sequence is portrayed is just so brutal. Let's take a step back. Imagine you are Marco. You overhear your two friends and squad mates talking about being Titans. You're kinda like, oh, I guess they're just making jokes, Kinda spooky though. They then suddenly smash you down, but you get this tiny glimmer of hope with Annie showing up. You'll still think that this is some twisted joke, so you just start screaming for her to help you out. But with every passing second, you realize that she's paying no mind to you. And suddenly, it must feel like a nightmare. It's like everyone around you is suddenly an enemy. Okay, Reiner and Bertolt's nonsense turned out to actually be true and now they're trying to kill me. Okay, but why is Annie not doing anything? Unfortunately, this time there really is no way to do the usual direction shenanigans to make us truly feel Marco's fear because we just know a lot more than he does. But still, the sheer horror of this entire sequence is so good. And also, don't forget that while we have seen both Reiner and Bertolt already crack emotionally, after Annie encased herself in the cocoon, we've barely seen any of her. So her being seconds away from a full-blown breakdown here definitely illuminates a bit more about her character. And by the way, I think this is also why people are a lot more forgiving toward Reiner and Burrito. Somewhat amusingly, I think it's kind of proving the point of the series where you are ready to excuse a whole lot more evil things because you just know the person more. Like for example, Reiner and Bertolt broke the wall and killed, like 250,000 people. But you will immediately say, well, they were brainwashed children, this was pushed onto them, and Reiner was literally having a breakdown while he was breaking the wall, He is a tragedy in this situation. Why do we say that? Well, because we've seen the dude melt down like 5 different times. Annie yo-yoing the scouts though, well, that just seems sadistic, right? But at the same time, in this sequence, it is Reiner forcing her hand. He actively guilt-trips her into being that honorary Marleyan. And keep in mind, this is his fault. He was the one yapping about things that he shouldn't be yapping about. And now bro has the audacity to pull this whole, oh, you're already sympathizing with these devils, you are a chosen warrior, a chosen savior of humanity, how can you feel bad for this monster? Prove that you and your father waiting for you back home are different from these filthy cretins. It feels very goofy comparing Annie yo-yoing scouts to like breaking the walls and all this, but what I'm saying is, if you feel bad for one of them, you should feel bad for all of them, and if you think one of them is bad, well then all of them are bad. It is just different shades of the same exact thing, and saying one is better than the other is falling into the same exact trap that this entire series is based around. And also, while I'll have to dance around the topic a little because this is still YouTube, note that Reiner uses language that goes beyond just basic guilt-tripping or these exaggerated blanket statements of devils. He very bluntly calls them an evil race. Obviously, this is the Spider-Man pointing meme, but it is also really, really bad. This is one of those moments where I think you realize that things are very, very far away from salvageable. There is deeply rooted, blind hatred that transcends any conventional war with any explicit objectives. He is literally just saying things as if they are absolute truths. More on that later in the episode. And as that eerie music kicks in, we loop back to the same scene of Reiner mumbling about Marco being eaten we already saw in Season 2, only this time with the full context. This whole sequence is absolutely chilling and also very quickly reminds you that just a few extra scenes of additional context can very quickly change your perceptions about a certain event. Reiner's mind might be cracking and he is also a victim in all of this, that much is true. But when he is the one actively forcing Annie's hand, well, it becomes a whole lot harder to feel bad for him. And on top of that, in the context of this episode, it also shows us how, despite constantly needing guidance from Reiner, Bertolt is kinda the most composed one out of the bunch. Which, isn't good considering he's about to become Reiner's final reinforcements. We then fade on over to their squad atop the wall prior to the sunrise in episode 50. As is often the case with Attack on Titan, there's a whole bunch of hidden little recap here. They briefly talk about Annie still being encased in the crystal, something that would of course continue to be important for a very, very long time. And there is also Zeke going to scratch his ear, which I think is just a quick visual cue to remind you that this is the big monkey. And speaking of said monkey, he is also immediately presented as the strategist in this group, with him quickly dismantling the entire argument that Annie might be undergoing some enhanced interrogation. He effectively just says, of course they're bluffing. If they put so much as a scratch on her, she'd just pop her Titan form and it'd be over. We are also immediately reminded of what's truly at stake here. Zeke goes in on Reiner saying, yeah, we can fight all over again if you want to, but if you lose, you're giving up the armor to another warrior. First off, considering this arc would indeed end with, not Reiner, but Bear Spray giving up his Titan, this is just putting that thought of these Titans actually being stealable at the back of our minds. We already know we have the syringe, so combined with this, you know what they say about syringes on tables. Yes, it's another Chekhov's gun. But secondly, all of this just positions Zeke as a higher rank than either Reiner or Bertolt. So while we may be concerning ourselves with Reiner and Burrito right now, the true enemy who we've yet to face is the big monkey. Another interesting thing to note here is what Bertolt says. Because now that we know Zeke's euthanasia plan, he seems to echo very, very similar sentiments. We don't really have any concrete information on what he has told the Marley squad and whether he's perhaps intentionally told them different things. But I think it just adds another interesting dimension of Bertolt perhaps actually aligning with Zeke's ideology, while Reiner is of course much closer to Eren. We also see Peak pop up, which just confirms that she is indeed a shifter, and also indirectly tells you that she is someone we need to keep in mind, but not really constantly watch as she's clearly not a fighter. And of course, we see exactly this, with her suddenly springing up and saving all her dudes. And to finish off the scene, we see them toast and slide off all the coffee gear. With all the talk about the fire still being fresh, this just shows us that the timelines do in fact add up, and there isn't like some sort of additional mystery in between that we should be keeping in mind. But what I find really interesting here is the mirroring to these final celebrations before their respective missions begin. Comparing this little campsite to the scouts is a little bit depressing, you know. And to immediately follow up on that, as those sorrowful strings come in, we get a whole bunch more scenes to hammer home the almost contradictory story that we be following. As I always say, much of this is definitely colored by hindsight, but Reiner teasing Bertolt about saving Annie from a dungeon and then even doing the dedicate your heart salute as he says they're going to save Krista and make good on their promise, it really does make you ask, what is behind their stories? Just like last time, much of this episode would also put us in the shoes of Marley as opposed to the scouts. So I think just like Reiner has that cognitive dissonance as to which side he truly belongs to, we as the viewers also begin to question the true motives behind everything we are seeing. Clearly, they have doubts about what they're doing, so if they are not just these evil monsters wanting to kill everyone, could it be that we've been actually following the wrong side all along? Is this Coordinates and Grisha's secret plan perhaps actually the evil in this series? Now we know that, kinda sorta yes, so this just very neatly begins to tip that perspective in the opposite direction, if you will. And we also get the super iconic shot of Reiner and Bathwater standing back to back, which is just super cool. Though as we finally return to the present day, we get this ever so slightly whiplashy scene as everyone is cheering about the defeat of Reiner. And to function as that bridge between these two perspectives, Jean notices Connie and Sasha both bawling their eyes out, and not even in the haha funny goofy way, but actually crying. Which, you know, immediately undermines what was supposed to be a grand victory. And note that all of this is silent. There is no music whatsoever. This is the show almost forcing you to choose a side. Are you cheering alongside the scouts? Are you guarded like Hanji? Or are you feeling bad for Reiner like Connie? That's why I keep babbling on about this direction of planning you in certain perspectives. This is not Trost that was just a triumph. This is not the wall sequence where it was a betrayal. This time, you are meant to decide how you actually feel. Also, Omega Overanalyzing, Eren's reaction here is maybe him thinking that he has broken the timeline because Reiner actually seems to be dead while he should still be alive. Okay, that makes no sense. And on that note of picking your side, we see something similar from Armin, who just mumbles that they never even had the chance to negotiate. This very neatly ties back to the earlier sequence of Marco, who too was just begging to talk to them, only now the roles are of course reversed. Except they're not reversed for long, because Reiner then screams and suddenly we zip through all of their reactions just like we did with Annie. Things are about to get exponentially worse, and everyone, especially Erwin, knows that very well. And so, as we soar past Levi, Peak runs up to Zeke, and the Chekhov's barrel finally goes off as we get yet another 10 out of 10 wit sequence of him throwing the barrel. Even going frame by frame, every single line here is so clean. And that zoom in we get on just his dead eyes is also just perfect. He's done this hundreds of times, so for him, there is literally zero emotion behind this. Armin, being the Omega brain that he is, of course immediately identifies that as Bertolt's hiding place. And so, that entire victory against the Armored disappears in an instant. All they did was just buy the Marley squad even more time. They wasted a whole bunch of Thunder Spears, wasted Eren's energy, and of course revealed where Eren is in the first place. And so yet again, the battle swings right back into Marley's favor. But before we pick back up with them, we jump on over to the Midcards talking about the Dark Liquid. Insert my usual haha funny goofies about Parody constantly taking L's because they didn't have any coffee, and when they discovered it, they immediately did the rumbling haha funny goofy. But yeah, I've been babbling on about the presence of coffee on Parody ever since like Utgard or something, so we'll jump over this. And right as we get back to the episode, literally the first line we hear is Erwin atop the wall just saying, "They fooled us." And just like that, you know things are very bad. Sure, they suspected that Bertolt is nearby, and even largely expected him. But him being deployed moments after they blasted Reiner means that, number one, like I already mentioned, they just wasted a ton of resources, and two, that means Bertolt isn't even necessary for Zeke's side. This whole pincer attack is about to get a whole lot more intense, and if Reiner was their shield, well then Bertolt is not quite spear or sword, but more like a walking mortar. They obviously don't know about his nuke yet, but even his regular transformation that he purposely kept small blew everyone flying atop the wall. So I think for Erwin, it's pretty clear that whatever their next move is, Bertolt is kinda their nuclear option to end this very quickly. Keep in mind that the only times they've actually seen the Colossal Titan's full form is when they blasted the walls in like 30 seconds flat. In Season 2, they only ever saw his torso, and that already kind of invalidated the entire fight with Reiner. So again, things are about to get really bad. But before we get to all the conflicts, he notices Reiner, and we get this super cool guitar riff as he changes plans. It's this complete 180 in music that, despite the surprise, signals composure, which very nicely sets us up for everything to follow. But as he lands on Reiner, he delivers some very convenient exposition about Reiner transferring his Okay, yeah, let's finally talk about this. First and foremost, these are fake-out deaths, and no matter how you swing it, a overwhelming majority of the time, they are annoying. They often insult the audience's intelligence and just try to string them along for some gotcha moment because they're too afraid of committing to an actual character death. So yeah, from that perspective, Reiner is already fighting for his life in more ways than one. And a totally separate argument that sort of goes hand in hand with this fake-out death is that this entire consciousness thing is not something we knew of before. Introducing it at literally the moment he's about to die just feels kinda cheap. Except that also goes both ways. I know a lot of people have criticized just the fact that this move does come out of the blue. And while I definitely agree to a degree, I think the blanket statement of just surprise ability bad doesn't really hold up to criticism considering it's the same exact thing we'd see in a second with Bertolt's nuke, it's exactly the same thing as Bertolt poofing into thin air instantly, it's the same thing as Eren gobbling up the armored vial and learning hardening like instantly, and so on. To a certain extent, you need to have some of these power-up moments to keep the story interesting, so the surprise factor isn't really the problem, it's the way it's presented. Bertolt's transformations, for example, can be controlled, simple as that. They are always destructive, but they can be infinitely more destructive. He's just never had to nuke anything, and so we also haven't seen it before. And with that line of thinking, the same argument applies here. There hasn't been a time where Reiner is borderline dead, so yeah, he hasn't used it. And we'd also see something kinda sorta similar with his partial transformation in Liberio, so it's not like it disappears either. And perhaps most importantly, Reiner actually doesn't die. So you can never use the argument of, well, he transferred his consciousness when it mattered once, but eventually still died because plot. Because he doesn't die. He survives the entire series. If this ability were to be introduced, he used it once, but then the same thing happened again and he didn't use it, then you'd be in trouble, but that doesn't happen. He lives. In terms of the Armored Titan as a concept, I do actually think that the whole transferring consciousness thing does make sense. We know that the spine is ultimately the single most important thing when it comes to the Titans. I mean, Eren literally got his head blown off, but even so, as soon as his head made contact with Zeke, the paths considered that a big ol' W because his spine was still perfectly fine, right? In terms of writing and narrative structures, this is also the typical peaks and valleys we see in just about every arc of Attack on Titan. We were caught off guard, things were really bad, we then pulled a reverse Uno of our own, but then get reverse Uno'd and are sent back to square one. Only this time, we have totally crossed the point of no return and things get really bad. So from that perspective, really no surprises there. But on the flip side, yet again, I talk about him surviving the Thunder Spears, but let's return to something prior. You know, that small thing of a literal Ackerman and humanity's strongest soldier catching him off guard, using the momentum of the ODM gear and gravity, and sticking him right in the neck and heart. I know it's a small thing, easy to forget, just like it's easy to forget that he proceeds to fall like 40 meters. Now, I will go to bat for AOT any day of the week, but this, yeah, I don't really like this. If this were literally anyone else except Levi, I could say, sure, maybe they missed, maybe they just didn't cut through, yada yada. But yeah, no, this is Levi with a lot of momentum launching himself at Reiner, and it still doesn't stop him. The thing with his initial fall is that the whole transferring consciousness thing really makes very little sense when you think about it. There is a small bit of time between the Thunder Spears hitting his body and actually exploding, right? Well, with Levi, there is no downtime. He struck his vital organs and his nape at the same time and then threw him like 40 meters. And perhaps even more importantly, looking past all of the fighting mechanics, because those you can argue about, a lot of Attack on Titan is all about strategy and what to do when that strategy fails. Take Season 1 for example. In theory, Erwin's plan was good enough to set us up all the way through to Season 2. Problem is, the existence of the female Titan fundamentally broke that plan apart because we simply didn't even know she existed. We were unable to react and so the mission failed. There were those peaks and valleys we just talked about, but ultimately, it's that one oversight that decided the entire fight. That's how these conflicts play out. Lots of strategy, but an equal amount of information asymmetry. That is what made the Annie capturing mission, the Season 2 ending, and Return to Shiganshina so different. It was the scouts who had the informational advantage. Annie took Armin's bait, and so she was captured. The Marley squad didn't know Annie was captured, and so Armin used that to his advantage and scored them an opening. In the present day, the Marley squad didn't know about the discovery of the Titans within the walls, so again, they have the strategic advantage. Only this time, that is completely nullified, which kinda goes against what a lot of Attack on Titan typically does. We had the advantage, but that means nothing because Reiner just survives. But on the flip side, yet again, it does make for an interesting subversion, both of which revolve around the Armor Titan. Yes, strategy, information, and adaptability are the backbone of Attack on Titan. And yes, Levi should have probably killed Reiner then and there. But both of those things are also interesting when looked at through the lens of, that is exactly what makes the Armor Titan so incredibly scary. He is nearly indestructible, just like we'd see in Season 4 with him just leaping in front of the barrage. An Ackerman can stick him with swords, he can be beaten by Eren, he can be thunder speared, but he is still next to indestructible, and that is exactly why Marley uses him as their breaching units. You might think that someone like Annie or Bertolt or even Zeke are better because of their offense abilities, but old Reiner can just go in there and tank like anything. And the thing is, while I talk about Reiner specifically and how he should have died because we had the strategic advantage, in the long run, Marley does take a massive L in losing the Colossal Titan. So when you zoom in on Reiner's survival, yeah, it didn't really pay off, but in the long run and sort of big picture wise, it did. This is not a total crushing defeat as we've seen before. There are losses on both sides, but we also capture one of the Titans. But on the flip side, for the last time, while I don't think the consciousness transferring thing is a plot hole per se, and this angle of Reiner being almost this immortal being could be interesting, I still think exploring another dimension to his hardening or something like that would have been a better way of exploring that ridiculous survivability. Give him like insane regeneration or armor beginning to pile on top of his armor, or like every wound becoming armored or something like that. I think Isayama didn't want to use the Annie cocoon again because, well, we've seen that before, but something like that could have been a bit more satisfying than him just surviving through means that we can't really visually see. I guess I'll put it this way, as much as I think this is kinda meh, I still think Bertolt just poofing into thin air back in Trost is a way bigger stretch than this. Okay, big picture wise, that's all the Reiner stuff out of the way. I'm sure I'm not going to be returning to this like 50 more times, just like I have been doing with the Wall Titans. But this burrito has grown a whole lot more cold, so he just tells Reiner that he needs to move a teeny bit, but if he can't, well, too bad, you're taking an L. You can't blame Bertolt, he didn't watch the previous segment, he doesn't know that Reiner has the plot armor Titan. And what I love here is how right after regrouping, the scouts are once again on the offensive. They know that his transformations are destructive, and they know that his Titan is massive. So if he didn't transform right away, clearly he's still trying to protect Reiner. And if he's trying to protect Reiner, well, there is enough time to Thunder Spear both of them, because yet again, information asymmetry. Old Burrito doesn't know about the Thunder Spears. But before we get to them blasting each other into space, Armin jumps in, just wanting to try and negotiate one last time. First off, this shot of Armin and Birchnut both standing atop the bell towers is just really cool, and the contrast drawn between the kid Armin looking up at the Colossal Titan to now both of them standing on equal footing is also really cool. But secondly, this whole angle of negotiations, or I guess I should actually say absence of negotiations, will of course continue to be a massive part of the series all the way to Season 4. There would be a whole lot of internal negotiations, but when it comes to Marley, well, we all kinda know what happened. And actually, as much as I joke about Season 4, something extremely similar happens here, with Bertolt just opening with, "If I talk to you, you will all agree to die?" And you know, like, what? That is such an extreme conditional that Armin doesn't even try to negotiate, instead instantly jumping to leverage. That, of course, being a Sleeping Beauty Annie. Problem once again, this Bertolt is very different. Initially, he might be a little bit timid, but seconds later...
Let them feed Annie to the pigs!
This conflict is entirely gloves off. The whole "we're ending this here and now" is not empty talk. Sure, Bertolt does suspect that Annie is perfectly fine, but they are serious about ending this right here, right now. And also, Omega Overanalyzing, note that Armin says she'll end up being fed to the pigs. Considering this entire story of Eldians and Marleyans began with a pigpen and cruel invaders, I think you can sort of look at this as a representation of disgusting human greed that fuels this endless cycle of violence. By feeding the pigs, in this case, with Annie, you are giving them more power, you are fueling this endless cycle of hatred and bloodshed. At the same time though, fed to a pig is also just a trope, so that could easily just be a common jape and that's it. Which, by the way, we need to stop pigs representing like filth and greed and stuff like that. Pigs are pretty cool, okay? Also, this almost chivalrous standoff is so cool. Both of them standing on this narrow ledge, just trying to balance on this knife edge that is this war. Both with their blades drawn, both using ODM gear, but only one donning the wings of freedom, I think continues with all of those themes of conflict amongst the same people who have somehow convinced themselves that they're on opposite sides. Though as Bertolt tells Armin that he's not going to break him down, that cold and tactical motif kicks in, and we know this motif. This motif doesn't signal anything good. He basically spells out the scouts' entire plan, and yeah, he is in control here. He has accepted the cruelty of this world and he faces it head on. He calls Armin a dear friend, but says that they're still going to die. And we then get this absolutely beautiful exchange of Armin almost giving up, just asking, "Do you really believe we are devils?" Only for Bertolt to say, "No, none of you have done anything wrong, and you're not devils either, but you still need to die." And just as he finishes the sentence, Mikasa in the Avatar state pops up behind him, but Bertolt's gamer instincts kick in and he manages to block the strike. But very importantly, he loses an ear in the process. Like he just said, they can talk, but they still have to die. So Bertolt's ear being cut off here, I think could be seen as symbolism for these negotiations being truly over. Ears are meant for hearing, right? Well, Mikasa just cut it off. And something that has to be brought up here, can we all just take a moment to appreciate Bertolt's skills here? Yeah, I get that he's fully on the defensive, but he still managed to get a solid kick in on Mikasa and get her off balance. I guess that warrior plus soldier training must be paying off dividends if he can actually face to face with Mikasa, even if for a moment. To be fair to Mikasa though, she's also playing it incredibly safe since, she doesn't want Bertolt to just blow them sky high. Still impressive though. And she also notes that this Bertolt is not the Bertolt they knew. He felt like a completely different person, there's no knowing what he's going to do. And also, this shot right here is an album cover if I've ever seen one, it is so cool. But there's one more thing to note here, the alarming trend of the music continuing to build even though it's just Mikasa and Armin talking alone. And with that, we hop on over to Bertolt, who basically spells out exactly why this conflict is just doomed. As a new rearrangement of UC Big Girl plays, he just says, "The truth is that nobody here is in the wrong. This is just how it had to happen, because this world is just that cruel." And the tragic but beautiful thing about that is that it makes sense. We have people like Mikasa, who of course have the more popular version of the statement with "this world is cruel, but also so beautiful." But that's the thing, even trapped inside of these walls, Mikasa had freedom, she had love, and she had hope. Their little trio could just be kids. They could chase each other to the now very familiar tree, they could get into some fights, they talked about their dreams and desires. There was some hardship, sure, but albeit shortly, there was genuine beauty in their life. Mikasa witnessed a tragedy at the hands of her fellow man, but even then, she met people who cared for her and protected her as if she was their own. With Bertolt, on the other hand, there is no "but so beautiful," because it's not. He was raised with the explicit acknowledgement that he and his entire family are devils and are to be erased. He hasn't seen even a single moment of childhood. If Mikasa ran to that tree, sharing in each other's laughter, then Bertolt had just lost one of his friends and watched the other two almost beat each other to death. Even visually, Paradis, despite being encased with these massive walls trapping them inside, is a lush place. There are grassy hills covered in a wide spectrum of flowers, there are massive trees as high as the walls themselves. Just within walking distance of their house, there is that beautiful tree on the hill. Marley, on the other hand, whenever seen through Bertolt's or Reiner's eyes, it's this cold, depressing, industrial sight. There is never any joy, it's always just grey or raining. There was no beauty there, no love there, no joy. From the day he was born, he was an expendable soldier fighting for his own survival. And so on Paradis, it is effectively a prisoner's dilemma. there's no way out of this for him, so yeah, it is as he says, they have to die because the world is cruel and that's just the way it is. And on that note, Erwin just stands there completely dumbfounded as a full-blown nuke that's not actually a nuke goes off in what is easily one of the best scenes in the entire series. Those guitar riffs as the explosion goes off are just 10 out of 10. This is not the wall reveal. There is no betrayal here, no sadness, no hate, really not even anger. To Bertolt, this is just what he has to do. This is war, and so the music is exactly that. Just these intense guitar riffs as the entirety of Shiganshina is blown to smithereens. And it's also very neat that those guitar riffs mark the end of the song, with it quickly turning to complete silence as we see everyone just try to compose themselves and wondering what just happened. We as the viewers got a very cool bird's eye view. We know how big the explosion was. But as far as the scouts know, literally everyone could be dead. And before we can get a grasp on who lived and who died, those familiar, harsh, intense pulsing beats kick in as we see Bertolt standing up. And Jean just mumbling, "You don't think we might be the only ones who survived," as we jump to Reiner, who too is alive, is just a stroke of genius. If there was ever a way to suddenly flip the board from feeling like a full-blown war with both sides on relatively equal footing to just survival, then Isayama pulled it off brilliantly. And this shot of even Aaron's Titan seeming tiny compared to the Colossal just throwing entire buildings is also excellent. And yeah, there's a reason why I call him a mortar. That's what he is. He's just flinging fiery bits of houses. Though as Armin composes himself, he quickly realizes that any ideas of battle of attrition are dead for them. Burrito has effectively opened a whole new front for Zeke's attack, and if they continue squeezing the scouts together, that's game over. And this shot of just hellfire raining down I think conveys that beautifully. Reiner might be indestructible, but at least he's fightable on equal footing. Bertolt is an unapproachable, lumbering giant raining down fire on anything within like 100 meters. And somehow, Armin must now command a mission to take him down. And what might be even better are the vocals kicking in as we see Erwin just watching Bertolt begin his march. The way he's framed as this harbinger of darkness, literally separating the skies from ash, it's just so foreboding, it's beautiful. I found a number of people doing different calculations as to what his explosion yield might have actually been, and while the numbers vary pretty wildly, this is still an anime after all, there's a reason why I keep saying that it's not actually a nuke, because the yield of this explosion is still tiny even when compared to the, smallest of nukes. Unfortunately, only in an alternate universe did I fulfill my dreams of going into the STEM field, so I don't think I should start running my own calculations here. My point being that the explosion is massive and certainly devastating, but also comparatively tiny. And to tie up this episode in a very neat little bow, as Erwin turns around to ask whether this is what Zeke wanted, we just see him go to scratch one of his ears. And so with that, the balance of power has well and truly shifted, and we are beyond any kind of negotiations. Also, side note, I haven't really mentioned it, but I remember a ton of people were noticing just how much attention is put on his ears, and already hypothesizing that his pointy ears and Aaron's pointy ears might be connected. They are the only two Titans we've ever seen with such a distinct trait. Well, now we know that it is indeed correct, and Grisha too had pointy ears, so I guess that's just a Jaeger family trait for some reason. But with that, that is another incredible episode of Return to Shiganshina. Trust me when I say, you have no idea just how much I love those guitar riffs as Bertolt's explosion goes off. That is prime Attack on Titan right there. But anyway, I've babbled on for long enough and my voice is completely gone. So next time, well, we all know what's coming. So I hope to see you back as we continue overanalyzing Attack on Titan. And that's the video. When I said I was going to test out some things today, I didn't mean getting the channel copyright strike, but you know, here we are. That aside though, my little IRL setup has already improved a little audio-wise since I recorded, so that's just going to be the thing that I gradually work on over time. Incorporating this whole different dimensions of the videos is definitely a fun little challenge for me too. But with that, this time, like 10 times over, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons and YouTube members who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcome to the newest members of the team. Runarson, I guess, Dario Kabasi, I think, Oscar Pearson, The Doctor, Gavin, TX Slick Nick, Very Smith, Winston Trotman Jr., Sam, Renee, Liam, Team YNE, and Dennis Corlew, I think. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my ramblings, so seriously, thank you, thank you. when it comes to copyright stuff, the extra safety net definitely helps me sleep at night. And one last thing you might be interested in, I'll be streaming my entire journey through the Elden Ring DLC on Twitch and my second channel, Korotos TV, so give that a look if you like. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!